Today I find myself in a brand spanking new 2021 Audi Q5. I mean, it's so new that I had to peel protective stickers off of the door sills. And the Q5 has been facelifted for 2021. So I want to take a look at both what's changed as well as how this car compares to its old self as well as its ever growing and ever evolving competition. This 2021 Q5 is the most base of 6 available trims. That makes it a 45 TFSI premium pack. It starts at the very base Q5 price of $43,000, and it's a humble $46,000 as equipped. The only option it really has is the convenience package, which consists of keyless access, auto folding and dimming, side view mirrors, a heated steering wheel, and driver seat memory. Otherwise, the 45 TFSI motor is a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, producing 261 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque. That's a 13 horsepower increase from the 2020 model I reviewed last year. Furthermore, there's now a 12-volt mild hybrid starter generator, which doesn't really add any power to this car, but it helps the powertrain perform a bit more smoothly, especially when you're coming to and taking off from a complete standstill. I noticed that as I'm driving around, I don't have that annoying jolting into auto stop start mode that you had in the pre-facelift of this car and the A4 and the A5. So I guess that's a solid powertrain improvement in my book. As always, all Q5s come standard with Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system, and this particular car has a 7-speed S-tronic dual clutch transmission as well. Now let's get on the road and see what else has changed for 2021. So setting off here in the Q5, I have its drive select switched over to dynamic, which effectively makes the throttle a bit more sharp and tightens the steering up a bit. It's certainly a far less dramatic change in this car than some of the competition, so I've found myself driving it in dynamic basically the entire time I've been driving it. The good news with this car is that it doesn't feel like a base car. In fact, if it weren't for the wheels or the lack of a sunroof, I probably would not have known that this car is one option away from being a base stripper Q5. Stripper? So for 2021, Audi has refreshed the Q5 and it now falls a bit more in line with the rest of the lineup, at least styling wise. So up front, you get a revamped grille, slightly redesigned headlights, as well as a bit of more aggressive front bumper. Out back, you get new taillights as well. You get a chrome strip that extends between the two taillights, and you get a slightly different lower bumper. Unfortunately, there's still no real exhaust on the Q5, but at least the SQ5 looks to have gotten real exhaust again, finally. I really do like how the taillights of this car really resemble the facelifted Q7 as well. So style-wise, the headlights are a wash for me, but their light performance is fantastic at night and a significant upgrade over the base headlights of the pre-facelift. For instance, the 2020 that I drove last year, those lights were not very good at night. These are pretty solid, and they have auto high beam, which is an added plus, something I've never even had on my own cars, so I get really excited and giddy when it turns on, and yeah. I think the taillights do look nicer than the pre-facelift cars, and they have a bit of that Audi mystique to them. It's a bit hard to explain, but when you're on the road, they really grab your attention, at least at nighttime. Every time I've driven past a new Q5, I'm like, oh my God, what is that? So I like that, and it has a strong light design. Audi's notorious for that anyway. The side profile is basically identical to the pre-facelift, the only difference being the slightly redesigned wheels. The 18s on this, they're serviceable, they're very low-key. I think the 19s do look better, but I'm not sure they're worth the $800 upgrade to everybody. Personally, I would definitely go for them. I think there's even 20s available on the higher trims of the Q5. Ooh, the car just told me please turn on headlights because I had them on 0. It's a really nice touch. It's only 5 p.m. and it's not very dark out, but I've never seen that before. I like it. The seating position here is pretty good. The seats are fairly comfortable, but certainly not the best and not as good as the SQ5. Visibility is solid as always, and the side view mirrors are massive. They're the exact same mirrors from the Q7, so they really are very large, but also look really nice. One of the best parts of this car is just having these massive mirrors and getting good visibility out of them. Otherwise, the car is easy to drive, and that's the intended purpose, obviously, so it executes that very well. The best changes, however, come here on the inside. So now the Q5 comes standard with a 10.1-inch touchscreen MMI using Audi's latest interface. It's a massive, massive upgrade from the pre-facelift cars, especially when you consider that the base system in the 2020 I drove last year was abysmally small and hard to use, difficult to use in comparison to this. Now, there was the upgraded system. I think it was a 7 or 8 inch screen, came with a nice controller and had navigation. It wasn't a terrible system by any means. It just had begun to feel kind of dated, and the base system you got was like a 5 inch screen, 6 inch screen. It was terrible. So this is not only a welcome upgrade in general, it's just great that it comes standard. It gives you haptic feedback. It's like the perfect distance, at least from my height, to easily interact with it. The only thing I don't like is there's no lip to really rest your hand on, so sometimes you find your finger moving around more than you like, which is a common problem with touchscreens and cars. And in fact, I still like having a controller because my little gripe with touchscreens, and this one gets a pass for being a little higher up, closer to your dash line, but it actually distracts you more to have to look down and touch buttons rather than just interact with maybe a hard key you know how to interact with. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. It's my little gripe. This car isn't too bad though. And it also gets wireless Apple CarPlay, and you guessed it, standard. The premium trim Q5s, at least the 45 TSIs, do not unfortunately come with Audi's virtual cockpit, but this center MMI screen certainly all but makes up for it. And I don't mind this gauge cluster. You still get a little bit of a LCD here in the middle that's plenty nice, and having some analog gauges humbles you. I'm still a sucker for analog gauges when it comes to motorsport applications, so here it's a wash. I get to see my virtual speed, or digital speed I should say, so I'm cool. So you get leather seats, a wireless phone charger, a safety suite which includes blind spot assist and lane departure warning, all standard, and even an audio system that doesn't sound too terrible considering it's the base setup, which is also true of the BMW X3, but not true of the Mercedes-Benz GLC. In fact, we're going to discuss the competition right after an obligatory tall boy test, so here that goes. So the Q5's primary competition, at least in my eyes, is the BMW X3 and the Mercedes-Benz GLC. And in fact, for 2021, Audi has even introduced a Q5 Sportback meant to compete with the GLC Coupe and with the BMW X4. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the coupe SUVs, especially not in this compact SUV segment. I think they do work a bit better in the mid-size segment, but in these, it just robs you of too much trunk space and headroom in the rear. And one of the biggest perks of this car is that I can comfortably fit behind myself. So if you're gonna get an SUV, why get rid of its practicality or usability? I don't fully get that. And to be fair, for a bit more money, you can get into a base Macan that, despite having a 4-cylinder, I believe a very similar engine to this exact engine, definitely drives a bit better than this and feels a little nicer. Or you can save some bread and get into Mazda CX-5, for instance, which is equally luxurious, although you're going to be missing out on that Audi brand prestige and maybe fit and finish to an extent. Sidebar, if you're looking at a mid-equipped Q3, similar to the one that I reviewed last month, and you can spare to spend a couple extra $1,000, definitely make the jump to getting one of these. Now back to the interior. It's undoubtedly a nice place to spend time. One of the only changes I would do is actually two things. I would go ahead and get the matte finish darker wood trim instead of this gloss light colored wood. I would also probably go ahead and opt for that brown leather interior, which gives you a black headliner. And I think the brown leather, the look just goes perfectly with this car's demeanor. Look, the GLC feels a bit more bougie, and the X3 is certainly more driver oriented, but this feels like the proper SUV of the bunch. I dream of driving this car in the English countryside on small B roads and parking on rocks and mud and hopping out with my white trousers on and not having a care in the world because the door extends past the door sill to protect your pants from getting dirty. It's intended for that exact purpose. It's just, so this car is built with that kind of attitude in mind, at least in my book. There was an effortless attitude with the first gen Q5, and I think it's finally back with this facelifted car. In fact, it was probably the facelifted first gen that I had driven and loved so much. So I guess I'm sensing a pattern here that I just like the facelifted Audis more than the pre-facelifts. And I guess that's kind of true because the new S5 certainly looks a lot cooler than the pre-facelift. Anyways, if driving pleasure is your primary objective out of a compact SUV and you have around $40,000, $50,000 to spend, I still think the X3 is the answer. This unfortunately understeers like crazy and lacks a bit of character when it comes to driving pleasure. But if you want standard all-wheel drive, a fantastic fit and finish, and a car that now again feels like an absolutely competent luxury SUV, then this Q5 with its revised and sharper exterior styling, more standard tech, and more smooth powertrain would be a fantastically solid choice. Now I can't wrap this review up without mentioning the 55 TFSI trim, or I guess engine, within the Q5. It seems to be an improvement on this car in about every single way. It gives you a plug-in hybrid, about 100 extra horsepower. You get a standard S-line body kit. You get a virtual cockpit standard as well. It sounds awesome, and it's not even the full SQ5. And I would get a premium 55 TFSI over a premium plus 45 TFSI for a couple grand more if you catch my drift. But for over $8,000 more starting than this car, I just can't deny the value proposition that you get jumping into one of these at this price, at $46,000, and that's before any incentives or discounts, which you obviously should be getting. The Q5, now facelifted for 2021, is an improvement that I would describe as more than the sum of its parts. I know I bashed on the 2021 Q5 that I reviewed last year a lot, but I really can't complain about this one much. They've seemed to have fixed everything that I had a gripe with, just about. The driving experience still isn't fantastic, but I'm looking at the car as, is it accomplishing what it sets out to accomplish? And it is. My little gripes are that there are these weird sensors up front on either side by the intakes or by the intakes that are just plastic. I don't know what their purpose is, because if you get a car that's optioned up with the adaptive cruise control, that gets a sensor that's located centrally, and these little, bubbly looking sensors, I don't know what they are. I don't think there's anything behind them, but if anyone knows, comment down below and let me know. Furthermore, the only other thing I don't like is that here in the lower center console, where there used to be the MMI controller, now there's just a little small cubby, and this whole lower area just looks a bit Spartan, and it's the weakest point of the interior, I feel like. If they had added maybe a cover for the cubby or something, I think it would have helped the interior look a bit more upscale. Seriously though, this is a much improved SUV, and I'm happy to say that I understand the Q5 again in a way that I haven't for many, many years. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are coming out every single week. As always, this is Rio. Peace.